I am so thrilled to be able to introduce Alison Phipps. Alison is the UNESCO Chair of Refugee Integration through Languages and the Arts at the University of Glasgow and Professor of Languages and Intercultural Studies. Over the past 8 years, she's had a number of incredible, impressive roles, including De Carl Fellow at Otago University and Distinguished Visiting Professor at Waikato University, Thinker in Residence at the EU Hawke Centre University of South Australia, and visiting professor at Auckland University of Technology. In 2019, she was awarded the Minerva Medal by the Royal Philosophical Society. Currently, she serves as co-director of the Global Challenge Research Fund, South-South Migration Hub, MIDEQ, and for the 2 Million Cultures of Sustainable Peace. She's an academic, activist, and published poet, regular broadcaster, and chairs the New Scots Refugee Integration Partnership for the Scottish Government. Her latest book is Decolonizing Multilingualism, Struggles to Decreate with Multilingual Matters. And most importantly, she is a granny, a foster mother, a knitter, and in her element on her allotment. So welcome, Alison. I wasn't able to name all of the amazing things that you've done, but we are so thrilled to have you here. And I am going to turn off my camera and hand it over to you.
Welcome into the house where we have bread to eat and a room at the table. Welcome into the house where we sit down to meet with stranger and neighbor. Welcome into the house. Come away in. Come away in. The storm it is rising, but we'll hold back the wind. Come away in. Thank you so much, Andrea and Patsy, and to just everybody online for that warm welcome and just for feeling the gentle spirit of where you are and how you gather. The manner of your gathering is so important, and in the work that you do, particularly the work you do with people who are non-dominant English, in the phraseology I've learned from yourselves in this last couple of weeks, whose mother language may well not be the one that I happen to have been born into, and the way that you in your spaces of adult education, of literacy and learning and language, try and make sure that all are welcome in the house, that they might have the bread of words to eat, that they might have room, that they might know the hospitality through languages and literacy that they can have into worlds of the imagination, worlds of possibility, worlds of employment, worlds of education, worlds of artistry, and worlds of the spirit. Thank you so much to all of you for the humbling invitation to join you in this online gathering, and also to responding so positively to my request to also be joined by my friend and colleague in the UNESCO chair, Tawana Sitole, also known as Ganyama Tope. In a moment, I'll let Tawana introduce himself in his speech, which is, as an oral scholar, the way he prefers to be cited. But it is an absolute delight to have him alongside, and you'll also be hearing from him through my presentation. And it was also his music from the MBEMBE that was settling you down into this half-hour talk from myself about the work we've been doing in the UNESCO chair team and some of the ideas and experiences we've had that I hope can be illuminating for you and perhaps offer a method and some courage and strength to your arms in the work that you're doing. But first, Tawana, would you like to just say hello to our friends and colleagues?
Thank you, Alison, and thank you to the organizers. Hekani LESLLA tokuchingamidzai ndini Ganya Matope tiri nyika dzino kwatinobva vanonzi Moyo Chirandu Gono reN'ombe Chikumira chemudanga Ganya Matope Damba Chirashwa ndiwo mushengero usina pakaminama vanourunura tinodzosa manja tichitenda gungano riri pano. Thank you. I greet you all in my own language, that this time my father's language. I speak mostly my mother's language, but I greet you. And by saying Hekani, I am really celebrating this space that we have together, your invitation for me to be part of this space and the sacredness of the gathering, because as we enter it, we will not leave the same way. We are transformed in one way or the other. So it is a great privilege for me to join you today. Thank you so much. Back to you, Alison.
Thank you, Tawana. Hekani.
Hekani.
The third one said, "The grass is growing up my chimney." But the hermit answered, "And you have driven away hospitality." I like to start my thinking about languages and literacy and education with this idea of hospitality. It's a profound and ancient idea, and it's an idea which is common across societies. It's particularly relevant in Scotland and is accompanied by the idea of fostership. Hospitality, that traditional greeting with milk and with bread or with oatcakes, and sometimes with whiskey, it has to be said. And then as the preparation of the space, the place where we come together and meet. But then that harder work of fostering a space together, a co-created action whereby those who are hosted and those who are hosts become one to one another, become part of the process of hosting and guesting each other. In Greek, the word hospitality shares the same root as host and guest. It has that same meaning. And for me, this is vital in thinking about our work of education, especially with adults who might be quite fixed at times in their notions and understandings of hospitality, and in our experience, flourish in a space where they're able to give hospitality to one another, including to the teacher. And much of our work has grown out of this understanding that when we complain that our rooms aren't warm, that our hearts are cold, that there isn't enough food on the table, when we are bound into an understanding of a myth of scarcity and complaining about cuts within education, that we're a little bit like the third person who went to the hermit and said, "The grass is growing up my chimney." We're complainants, we're full of grievance, we believe that there isn't enough, that there is no abundance in this world. And here the wise one answers, the hermit answers and says, "You've driven away hospitality." And so much of our work within the UNESCO Chair for Refugee Integration is about what happens when we hold a space for hospitality. We hold the bowl of tears that says to the stranger, "Come with your tears, you are welcome." But we also expand a space for joy. And we allow people to try and make a world that is better than the one that they've come from and that augments all of our being. And that we do it not by having a plan, a model, a timeline, a linear pursuit in the way that most project management and curricular timelines require us to fit things into forms, but rather we allow ourselves to be held by what the conflict transformation scholar John Paul Lederach has called the vessel or the circle, the space of resonance, an idea which is ancient but which is also new and which can create a space of equality and hospitality for these moments of gathering that we make together. So we understand in our work, the work of integration as hospitality, and that means we understand languages and literacies as primarily about the human integral task of creating communities of hospitality and of fostership. For us, in our work, particularly in the Scottish context, where integration is also held by a policy of integration by the Scottish Government, integration is a question of mutual reciprocal hospitality. It is quite the opposite of assimilation. It's an individual and a collective task. It's not called das Zwischenmenschliche, the quick of human relatedness. It's formed in the meeting together and the making together. We can't know it until we start to make it. And when we're coming to look at languaging, and I know that Jug Wilder, who's our next keynote, is going to be speaking about the work of my colleagues Li Wei and Angela Crease, and Otago Garcia, and their work on translanguaging. We've really been thinking in linguistics of late about how we might translanguage, how we might allow hospitality across the way to allow students and teachers to operate not in target language and mother language and to have segregated spaces, almost balkanized spaces, but actually that we allow for a flow and we allow for a space to do this. And the educational energy and research has been very much focused on this new theoretical pursuit and identification of what happens in multilingual spaces over the last few years. The work I'm going to be speaking to you about with Tawana is work which is a sister project to the project that Li Wei and Angela Crease have been involved with, funded by the UK government's Arts and Humanities Research Council, and which has been able to look at language as a category, so as a fundamental element of human being, not just as a construct that we make out of being human, but actually fundamental to who we are in similar ways to race and gender and class, one that marks us and makes us, and that we need to treat with an equal understanding and honor in the same ways that we have been learning to honor race and gender and class in problematic and difficult and fraught and painful ways over the years. And I say this really mindful of the fact that Patsy and Andrea are in the Twin Cities in Minnesota at the moment. A home without hospitality is a terrible thing. Within parts of Europe over the last few years, we've identified some villages where the population, the average age of the population is around 75. And the adults have said that they would rather die out than have people come to live in their village who do not speak their language. A home without hospitality is a terrible thing. Safety is also not possible without a multilingual framing. And again, in some of the work that I've done over the years, I've been really conscious of the way that multilingualism is used to frame a space. So in the lovely way that Patsy was just sharing that final slide with all of the words for thank you, in the beautiful way at the beginnings and endings of gatherings and events, but also in places of danger, we try and find a way of marking that with a degree of hospitality that might help people be safe and be safe from emergency. Just to give you a few examples of this, in Scotland, we have these wonderful signs as you leave a car park, which say drive on the left, conduisez à gauche, linksfahren, so which ensure that people see in their own language the side of the road they need to drive on, because obviously in the United Kingdom, we drive on the left-hand side of the road, which is the right side of the road. And we've done this really without thinking too much about these as boundary spaces or markers, but places of making sure people can be safe. I did some research a few years ago on tourism and looked at what people providing hospitality were doing to make people feel safe around food, around the border of the mouth, and also around places of danger that might exist. So around things like fire alarms or emergency exits, or about what to do with sanitary protection in toilets, so borders of the body and borders of life. And I found that these were the places where a lot of attention was paid to translation and multilingualism, and in quite funny ways. So as well as the way with the official signs telling you to drive on the left-hand side of the road, there was a lovely menu that a wonderful Irish Irish woman had translated painstakingly using one of those little tiny gem dictionaries which she showed me, and she'd given us the translation for poached eggs or scrambled eggs in French and in German. Only what she'd given us was poached eggs, as in eggs that had been stolen under cover of darkness. And what she'd given us for scrambled eggs were eggs which were scrambling up a cliff face. But what was beautiful was the intention, the way that this menu created such joy and attention and gratitude in guests for a moment of laughter and levity, but also for an attention to safety and understanding of what people might be consuming. Similarly, in my time working in Aotearoa, New Zealand, every few weeks, the secretary would come into my office and point to signs like the two you can see on the slide, and then get hold of my body and push me underneath a desk or into a doorway and say, I need you to know what to do in an earthquake. And coming from a country that doesn't experience earthquakes, I was really grateful for that bodily attention, not using language, but actually helping me learn in my body how it was I was to act to stay safe. This discourse around languages as hospitality stands in direct contrast to the dominant speech in much of our curricular literature and in much of our work about languages as possessions and as competences. We often hear language spoken of as, this is my language, speak my language, speak the language of this country, of my country. We hear people saying, I speak these languages, I have my English, or asking questions of those learning other languages, which suggests there might be something wrong. Why are you learning that? As I've been asked on many an occasion about Te Reo Māori or Tigrinya or Gaelic. Why are you learning that? That's not useful. Individual competence, acquisitiveness, and consumption being framing devices. And I know that this often stands in direct contrast to the work that you as educators are doing in your classrooms to enable people to be fully human and fully able to take up their place within a community in the way that they learn language and in the way that language can act as hospitality and can do the work of hospitality. Trying to think outside of these boxes of competency and into an understanding of diversity, out of the monoculture of the form and into the multicultures of multiple experiences that might be somatic, embodied, that might be oral, spoken or heard or sung, that might be artistic, that might deal with all of the senses, is very difficult for those of us who've been schooled within the dominant traditions of the global north, and particularly under neoliberal capitalism. The scholar Untitled MBEMBE says this of the post-colony and of this work. He says we should first remind ourselves that as a general rule, the experience of the other or the problem of the I of others and of human beings we perceive as foreign or other to ourselves has almost always posed virtually insurmountable difficulties to the Western philosophical and political tradition. We can't think ourselves outside of our thinking boxes. We're kind of in a double bind here in the ways we've been taught and trained. And our work within the UNESCO chair and within the projects that I'll share briefly with you has been very much about saying, so how can we be led by others? How can we find our ways south? How can those in our classrooms, particularly those from refugee and diaspora and migrant backgrounds, help us understand that there is a great richness and abundance of ways of thinking beyond the myths of scarcity that might lead us to use a metaphor like the grass is growing up my chimney and I'm too cold and there's not enough. So I'm going to now let Tawana give you a little insight into some of the ways he has addressed this particular question.
Thank you, Alison. Once in a while, I hear the comment, you speak good English. In my school days, it was a compliment, but at some point, it got a bit complicated. I have good memories of school, though I cannot remember what period we got history or why geography kept getting moved around. Though I can remember that English came aftermath of a hectic timetable. Learning English was easy at first, but at some point, it got a bit complicated. Some of my peers got a bit fierce in their determination to speak good English. I wish this good English was good enough to translate the shock of hearing people mispronouncing their own names in order to sound more English. I wish this good English was good enough for untwisting of the tongue-tied, briskly brush themselves aside. I really could have done with a better student's companion to help clarify some questions of spelling. Was it supposed to be copying or coping we were meant to be doing? And where was that trusty student's companion to help detect silent letters and other dramatic shrapnel embedded in so many innocent victims? I really could have done with a better student's companion to help clarify questions of pronunciation. Was it supposed to be a minute silence we were meant to be observing, to reflect on our loss, reflect on our neglect? What happened to my mother tongue? My tongue, mother. But nowhere to start or how to react. Instead, it's just a smile, a little awkward smile, my euphemism for words. Every so often I hear the comment, you speak good English. I wish this good English was good enough to persuade the easily swayed to stop living the shame way. I wish this good English was good enough to calm the hysteria. What about the preset, reset, incessant alarm that shattered my dreams? My preschool dream of elders taking care of everything before it became all uniform on the assembly line. Blazer, basha, blazer, basha, blazer, basha, blazer, basha, blazer, basha on the assembly line. Shut up, sit down, stand up, sit down, shut up, sit down, stand up, sit down, shut up, sit down, stand up, sit down on the assembly line. Pray, sing, pray, sing, pray, sing, pray, sing, pray, sing, pray, sing, pray, sing. Shut up, sit down, stand up, sit down on the assembly line. Pull up your socks, tuck in your shirt, and fix your tie. Weak arms twisted by the brutish on the assembly line. No more freestyle, freestyle, but specified hairstyle, hairstyle, single file into the classy room in order to be classified as educated. I don't know when I'll next hear the words, you speak good English. I just hope this good English will be good enough to express the simplicity of humility within the complexity of society. The scribblings are there and I am aware, sprinkling inklings of my humanity. And like the ancestors, again, keep praying for rain so that next time I hear that complicated compliment, I'll be ready to react. Probably with a smile, a little awkward smile, my euphemism for words.
That was incredible. Thank you so much. I think everybody here feels the power and feels blessed to be here. Alison, I see you are back. You want to reshare your screen?
I'm back. Sorry, that's the first time that's happened, but we've just had a storm. Thank you, Tawana, for that lovely poem and for just bringing us all a little into the world of the the work that we've been doing. And maybe just also to say to everyone that when Tawana works with these words, it opens the air of the classroom, and so many people then start to tell their stories of their experiences of learning English, the minute silence, the way in which the words in English just are so peculiar and complicated, but also poetic, and the way it gives others permission to use language at the height of its powers. And a language that they're learning maybe as a second, third, fourth, fifth language at the height of their powers, in order to help people be part of a community of new speakers and new makers of the English language. So to pick back up where I was in thinking about some of the things that we do with language in the way that we frame it in this Western tradition. One of the other things that my colleague Michael Cronin has spoken of is about languaging and language use in the Anthropocene. And this is especially relevant when we're listening to the predictions and the science from the IPCC at present. But he says that one of the things we've done in our research on language is come to it with an extractivist attitude. And he says we look to mine and codify and extract language and data in our research. The fossil fuel of rhetoric, he says, which we burn in our universities. And again, these observations help us think about shifting into maybe a kinder or a gentler and a more hospitable way of thinking about the world, because all of these approaches of possession, extraction, belong to a colonial mindset, belong to imperial ways of thinking and teaching. And as part of our work of linguists, we are part of the work of making a world in language in different ways. So I want to tell you a little about this project that we've been involved with. There are many that I'm involved with at the moment, but the one that's really relevant to your work and of interest, the sister project to the one that Li Wei and Angela Christ and Adrian Blackledge were involved in leading, was called Researching Multilingually at the Borders of the Body, Language, Law and the State. We had £2.5 million, 11 countries, 22 researchers, 5 case studies, 2 hubs, and then out of it grew much bigger and exciting projects, all of which have recently been axed by the UK government in its wisdom of aid cuts because they were working overseas. And one of them was also within Researching Multilingually, had a hub within the University of Arizona. So for your work and your conference in person next year, I'm sure you'll find it really interesting to engage with some of our scholars who worked on the project with us there. This is what a project looks like when it's all tidied up and looks neat and tidy and works like clockwork, a little bit like the Industrial Revolution that was responsible for so much extraction. And this was a slide that I offered to the interview panel when we were bidding for the money. But the panel also said to me, well, we want to know exactly what you're going to make, because we had said we want to work with the arts and we want to work with improvisation, and we want our participants and our learners within our projects to make something, and we don't yet know what it will be. And my response was, if I can tell you the answer to that question, I'm not an appropriate educator and I'm not doing my research properly. I don't know what we're going to make because we're going to decide that together. In the end, we made an extraordinary musical and we went to the center of the world. The funders wanted us to go to London, New York or Paris, but actually we went to the Dangba rainforest in Ghana and worked with a group of displaced and indigenous young people to dance and enact the themes of multilingual education to the adults in their community. So we flipped and flipped and flipped the normal models and hierarchies of working in the course of that project. Our core understanding and issues were about what happens when we are working with languages in whatever space it might be, in places of duress and pain and pressure, and how we might break with those understandings that I presented to start with and research multilingually in different disciplines. We had some core aims looking at, as I said before, language as a construct and a category, and particularly upending the normal routines of our academic representation and giving artists the power that they are normally denied to present and represent, especially artists from the Global South. And Tawana is one of the artists who worked with us on that and really then took the project and led it in the latter stages as we saw the potential and power of this work. So here we see these questions circulating. Who does monolingualism serve? And what happens when monolingualism is experienced as multilingualism is experienced as hospitality? We worked in the context of global mental health. We worked in law. We worked on the EU borders. We worked in Arizona on the borders, and we worked in the Gaza Strip. So in contexts of considerable conflict and at a time when refugee movements were augmenting considerably. And we asked this question: what happens to emotions and to ourselves and to our teaching when English, or the dominant language of a place, the language associated with possession, with colonialism, with acquisitiveness, and with extraction, when that takes a step back and doesn't disappear, but allows itself to be in the back carriage or in the back seat or quietly sitting in a corner until its time comes. And I'm going to invite Tawana to just unmute himself and come back on camera to talk a little about some of the experiences we had when this happened. Tawana, do you want to say a little about what happened when we decided to put English in the back seat?
Thanks, Alison. We had to acknowledge, first of all, the power we're wielding. We had the funding of large institutions from the global north, and we had all our training that had us sort of pick up certain habits. And so we really had to do what Alison was describing, the flipping and the flipping. So for me, for example, as a playwright, the normal process would be I would script something and then I would present it to a room of actors, and then we would start a reading and then progress into making the theater piece. But we realized along the process with Alison, including one very important conversation we had actually while we were in Arizona, we recognized that devising would be the way to go forward, because using an idiom from one of the proverbs in Zimbabwe, they say that we know our way because our feet have beaten a path, and that is how we find our way. But sometimes we reach the ruare, which is a stone face, where our feet cannot make a mark. And it's a point that reduces us all to learners, all together. And so we had to go back to the ruare and say we're all learners. And so the power that we're wielding, not only with the institutional badges that we bring with us, we also are speaking this language that I learned. This is my third language, English, but I learned it through my education, and it is the one that dominates a lot of spaces. So we recognize that if this work was going to be meaningfully co-made with the young people we were making with, we had to adjust the position of English within this. And so we went through a very painful experience. I have to let you know, it is not easy to let English take a back seat when you have time pressures. And we can talk about time, what time is, but that's another conversation. When you have time pressures, you have the pressures of fulfilling your obligations or objectives that you've set and promised your funders. So we had all that to carry with us. And so we went through a very difficult period where even as the team, we were quite strained, and there was a lot of tension between us, but we persevered and we persevered. And thanks to Alison's leadership on this, because we kept slipping back. Oh, time is running out, time is running out. But the more we opened the space, we discovered so many great things about the young people skills, qualities that they had that we would never had discovered if English was in charge of the space. I think I'll say only that for now, Alison, and we'll talk some more later.
Yeah, thanks to Anna. Exactly. That experience, a hard one, a difficult one, and one where we constantly had to prompt each other to stop using English and use other languages and allow translation to fill the space, even though it was counterintuitive to the time spans that we were looking at. And our colleagues from the University of Arizona came as applied linguists to accompany and observe what we did as participant observers and to see what happened. How much time were we spending speaking English? What was happening as a result of us pulling back? What created the different learning experiences in the space by us doing this work? And they had some very interesting results, which I'll come on to in a little bit. Out of this, I wrote this book, Decolonizing Multilingualism, helped by Tawana, helped by Piki, Diamond, my colleague in Aotearoa, New Zealand, a Māori colleague, and helped by my family who are Eritrean in the Sudan. And I reflected a lot in this on how difficult it is to be non-dominant, to step back, to be part of those processes which those who aren't in the dominant categories experience all the time, and what it takes to step back and try and use try and allow different space to happen. So in this, there's a short manifesto that we worked on together about what it might take to decolonize multilingualism, to work in our classrooms and in our projects in different ways that can be hospitable to a different worldview, that don't just reverse it for a different set of power paradigms, but actually try and work in these circular conflict transformational ways, and really acknowledging the extent to which this is about our stories and this is a political struggle. Most of all, what we did was acknowledge, as Tawana was mentioning there, our failure at researching multilingually. It was extremely difficult. Most of the time we didn't manage it. Most of the time it was really hard work or felt very partial. And it was really only when we allowed a full hospitality to the arts and checked ourselves constantly around our use of speech and language that we began to break the habit. It takes about 6 weeks, scientists have told us, to break a habit. And our habit breaking began to happen after about 6 weeks. And then it became joy and laughter, performance and dance, and those kinds of communitas experience that Victor Turner speaks about in the literature on liminality and communitas that produce something new, something exciting, and a leveling out where real openness to learning can happen. That kind of space that trauma therapists have also said can happen after failure, because when we come to a place that is whole and healing, our brains will be receptive to something new again, and we will be able to learn. And this understanding for me is crucial to work with refugees. So in our work, we looked at what happened when I lost speech because I could not move for physical pain, and what happened in the processes there of healing. And you can read that little extract in the book, but it's quite visceral. We looked at what happened when language was under pain and pressure and your speech is robbed from you. We looked at what happened when your heart is moved and in the game and in the family, and when the things that happen to your students or your colleagues are so deeply wounding and moving to your sense of what humanity is, that you begin to change too. We didn't pretend that these aspects don't belong in our research and our professional lives, but rather thought, how might we incorporate these into stories that it is brave for us to tell and therefore safe for others to tell. And we looked at what it might mean to decolonize the mind, taking that great phrase of Ngugi wa Thiong'o and following there the dimensions that have come from my colleagues in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and in their bid to live under the Treaty of Waitangi, a treaty which I'm sure, as many of you will know, allows for the coexistence of different cultures and 2 different languages and ways of going and understandings of legal systems at one and the same time. What happens when you give hospitality in ways that seem paradoxical and impossible, and we came up with some really interesting answers. But those answers were in poetry. Those answers were in story, in proverb, in song, in gift, in object. And so those were things we found ourselves needing to use as an idiom, perhaps our new dominant idiom in the classroom. I'm aware, Patsy and Andrea, that we're maybe coming up to time. Can I just get a time check from you?
We started a couple of minutes late, so you still have a few minutes before we need to wrap up.
That's great, because I'm just at the point where I'm wrapping up. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So just to bring Tawana back in at this point, because this is where we can share with you some of what we found from our work with the young people, and some of the important points that I think were really surprising to us about working with what we called an intentional multilingualism. And we did not see this as the same as translanguaging. There was translanguaging within it, but it was more about our methodology and our approach as improvisation for allowing this space to be a multilingual space, but intentionally multilingual, and without me doing what I'm doing with you now, which is speaking primarily in English. And Tawana, do you want to also just unmute and come off onto camera, and we can just share some of our thinking here? But what we found when we did this was that there was a real importance to things being opaque for me. I was the one with the power, the money, the checkbook, the white woman with a purse, as everybody laughed at me and called me. But actually, it was really important for me and others to experience me not understanding. Tawana, do you want to maybe say something about that aspect?
We didn't know what we were really starting here. We looked at the space and we recognized that, you know, English has to take this step back. But then once we started doing that, all these things started happening. The slowness that you see there, because we're thinking about time and time in a particular way. And then the discomfort of being in the room, 20+ languages, and waiting for translations to happen until it reached the turn for English. So we had the experience of waiting and letting something else take precedence, an experience that a lot of people who don't possess the powerful languages or the powerful passports to cross borders, as we were experiencing, that waiting, that 7-year wait, which is the average wait in the UK for someone to be processed for an asylum claim. That wait, we were feeling it. So this is something that was an inadvertent discovery for us by just taking this this route. And then untranslatability as well, very important, where we have to allow that opaque space where things can just not be, you know, moved from one point to another. Alison, back to you on the conflict.
So in this and in this conflictual space, we had to work very hard with conflict transformation processes. And we did a lot of work with a circle. We did a lot of work passing objects. We let an object lead and speak, the object of a calabash, which you've maybe seen in some of the slides. And as the applied linguists, David Gramling and Chantal Warner were working with us, particularly David, their observation to us was that we spent a lot of time, we slowed things down a lot, and yet actually our progress seemed to be quicker. That everything appeared to be opaque to one another, and yet paradoxically there was greater transparency. That people seemed to feel a lot of discomfort and conflict that normally we would rush into fixing with English. But actually the fact that we took time to work through that actually meant there was much greater trust and willingness, and a sense of a space of greater hospitality. And in many ways, these are our primary findings in the sense of finding anything in an improvisational space, or our creations, if you like, that by doing this, we found that these paradoxes that are counterintuitive and go against the grain of many of those Western modes of thinking actually served us better, enabled much more beautiful, life-enhancing, pain-holding things to happen in the space of learning. So just to finish here and finish off with a final thought, when I'm trying to gather this together and understand what is happening when we shift these ways of working, when we consider researching multilingually, when we acknowledge the failure, even in really high profile projects, what seems to happen is that a strange kind of poetry happens. And Brueggemann has spoken about this, about the creation of new worlds, which is what we're involved in creating and learning all the time. That the new world is not given whole any more than the new self is given abruptly in psychotherapy, but it's given only a little at a time. One poem, one translation, one song, one healing, one pronouncement, one promise, one commandment, one law, one class. So my encouragement to all of you in this wonderful space that you have together is to celebrate and talk about the failures and to let things just be really understandable and not understood, and to sit with those discomforts and to enable those to be part of how you are walking a little in the shoes of your students who will be having these experiences much of the time, but also enabling students who maybe are from a dominant cultural group, from the dominant language, to also have a share in the richness that can come from slowing down, from waiting, from not understanding. And I'm just going to finish before we maybe take a little space for a couple of questions, just by stopping sharing my screen. And in that spirit of hospitality, of sharing this scarf with you. We work a lot with this scarf and scarves like it. We work a lot with this scarf because this scarf was a gift from my family to me. And it was a sign that something had happened. And I didn't understand what it meant. I didn't understand the pattern on the cloth. I didn't know what it symbolized, but I knew it was important. And yet over the years, over time, slowly but surely, this scarf has been passed around class after class, group after group. It's been used to hold babies in slings. It's been used to bandage sprained ankles. It's been used to wipe brows that are too hot. And as in my weather today with the storm that just took my first internet connection off, it's been used to shelter and cover the hair. It's a beautiful thing with many uses. And I think for me, it's become a little of a symbol of ways in which the scarf is a language, the calabash has a language, these objects have language. They can open us out into a way of understanding hospitality through languages and fostering a world that is worthy of the flourishing of our classrooms. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Juana and to Alison. That was incredibly powerful. And see Monica commenting, how do you give a standing ovation in a virtual gathering? But that was so incredibly powerful. And I've been seeing in the chat, I think grammatical shrapnel is going to be a phrase that you will hear LESLLA practitioners using from this day forth. And also just want to lift up that we make the path by walking it, that we are all here in a space and we are currently trying to create a path to be the best practitioners that we can be. So again, thank you both so much. And I hope you're able to see the chat and seeing all of the accolades and thanks that are coming in and comments about how powerful this was.
Merci beaucoup, tout le monde. Gracias, gracias, totenda, totenda. Thank you. And I know Tawana also wants to finish appropriately as well for you all.
Iere, iere, mi separare, iere, iere, mi separare, guaram, ananda zufa guaram, mi separare, guaram, ananda zufa guaram, mi separare, iere, iere, mi separare, iere, ere, muy separuare.
Feel like inadequate to have the words to summarize and to wrap this up. But thank you both so much for the gift of being here, the gift of your words and your teaching. And as I sent a message to Alison, I wish we had 2 hours for this keynote. I feel like we can keep going. There's so many, I know there's so many questions, but we do need to wrap up to make sure that everybody has a moment to step away before we jump in 5 minutes to our first roundtable breakout room. But I want to remind everybody that this keynote is being recorded. It will be shared on the Padlet, so you can go back, watch it again. We'll also do our best to share the transcription, and Alison has generously shared her slides, which has a link to the project website where it sounds like you can see performances and learn more about the work that has been done. So we're going to kind of officially in the keynote today, because we want to have a break. If people would like to stay on for the next 5 minutes if you have any questions in the chat, but we do want to make sure we provide a little bit of space for people to step away, do some movement, and be ready to come back in 5 minutes for our first roundtable breakout room. And I see that there's a YouTube one, just shared a YouTube link in the slides or in the chat. So, and I think any of the things that are shared in the chat, we can also pop those into the Padlet so that people can watch them later. All right, so going to officially wrap up the keynote, letting people know again that we are using one link for the entire symposium. So if you stay here, you will be able to enter the breakout room. Again, we're going to take about 5 minutes. I'm going to turn off my camera and then we will officially, and I'm going to end the recording, and then we will officially start the breakout rooms in 5 minutes. So thank you one last time, Tawana and Alison. This was incredible.